One of the great leaders of this support for the English in the Northeast was a woman named Molly Brant. Now, most textbooks always have a picture of her brother, Joseph Brant, the great leader of the Mohawk Indians. But he wasn't the leader of the Mohawk Indians. He was the muscle, that is, he led the men in battle. But Molly Brant, as was not untypical, was the diplomat of the tribe. And it was Molly Brant who negotiated with the British in Canada and said, we'll support you, we'll fight on your side, we'll persuade members of other tribes to either be neutral or to support you. But in exchange, you have got to grant us tracts of land in what was then Canada so that we will have some place to go. Because even if you win the war, the Americans are going to try to take our land. And the British said, sure. The British said, fine. These were these Native Americans were not only good fighters, but they were fighting, and here's the part about it being many revolutions. What were they fighting for? They were fighting to remain independent. They were fighting for their own liberty. They were fighting for freedom, and they were fighting for their homeland. And so the very same words that we could use to define Patrick Henry or Thomas Jefferson, neither one of whom fought, by the way, except with their mouths. That is, they orated and they wrote, but they weren't actually warriors. But the very words that defined what Patrick Henry thought he was fighting for is what Molly Brant and Joseph Brant and hundreds, thousands of other Indians believed they were fighting for. They were fighting to preserve their own liberty. And so if you take a look at why the Indians sided on the whole with the British, and you understand what they thought was at stake, then you see the irony in the American Revolution, if you think of it solely as a revolution by white American colonists against the king who they declared to be a tyrant, who wasn't really a tyrant at all. But that's another story. If you see it through the eyes of Molly Brant, then you understand that they are desperate to preserve their own heritage. They're desperate to preserve their own right to the land. And if you think, perhaps, that they were overwrought or they thought the sky was falling when it wasn't, you have to think about, if you move forward in history, you have to think about the Indians in Georgia. Because the Indians in Georgia did absolutely everything white society asked them to do. They said, have the right kind of family structure, women in the house, men in the fields. And the Indians, the Cherokees, said, okay, we'll do that. Become Christian. Okay, we'll do that. Have a written language. Okay, we'll do that. And in fact, they had a newspaper. And then when people thought there might be gold in the hills, what happened to those Indians? What happened to those Indians was what we call the Trail of Tears. That is, one way or another, no matter how hard Native Americans attempted to satisfy the demands of the dominant white society, at great expense, by the way, to women who lost their autonomy, who lost their identity as farmers. At great expense to them, it was never enough. That land was going to be taken away from them. And so you see it